My name is Nayaswami Jaya, and this week's reading for this satsang, Living Wisely, Living Well, I'd like to share with you before I begin the discourse. It's a reading that I find very, very useful in our ability to live in a harmonious way and happily in our life. It's very short. Swami Kriyananda writes, "Accept others as they are, and you'll attract supportive friends wherever you go." Accept others as they are, and you'll attract supportive friends wherever they go. So how true, how true. Many years ago, actually not so many, a few years ago, I attended a very classical stage play. It was written by George Bernard Shaw, a Britisher, about 100 years ago, or it's based on a story that he wrote. It was called My Fair Lady. Now, My Fair Lady is a comedy musical, and in this play, the fellow who's the main character in this play, he sings a song in this play, which I thought was stuck with me, and I was reminded of it by this topic. He sings, "Why can't a woman be more like a man?" And of course, why can't they be more logical? Why can't they be more organized? Everything in life would go so much better if only a woman would be more like a man. Now, of course, a woman could sing the very same song, "Why can't a man be more like a woman?" Why don't they communicate more? Why doesn't he remember things and put things away and perhaps keep himself a little bit more orderly in the home life? I think beneath both of these, maybe what each of them are saying, or maybe when we say this, when we think this way, why can't somebody be more like me? Isn't that really what it is that we're saying? We look about us and we see people doing one thing and another, and they just are not behaving the way that I would have them be. They do things that I disagree with. They do things that are not in harmony with my wishes. And consequently, I begin to think about all the reasons why that other person should reform. And if I take this too deeply, pretty soon I begin to have a dislike for that person, maybe, and a certain rejection of that person, a certain disapproval of that person. And what happens? We begin to build this barrier around ourselves, and it's exactly the opposite of what Swamiji is saying here. If you can learn to accept, if we can learn to accept people as they are, we'll find supportive friends wherever we go. Think of the life of Paramahansa Yogananda. There's that story, and he was in a hotel where he was in the lobby of the hotel, and maybe it was after one of his discourses, I'm not sure. But he was in a hotel and he was approached by a fellow who was obviously a little bit drunk, having too many drinks. And the fellow came up to him in a very familiar tone and put his arm around Yogananda and said, "How are you, Jesus Christ?" Because Yogananda had long hair. And you could think a man like the master, or a dignified person, might reject that and might be offended by that. But Master was not offended at all. He saw the situation. He saw the man was drunk and obviously not in complete control of his faculties. And he looked at him very sincerely. And with deep love, he looked into his eyes and he gave him a little touch of the divine bliss that was in his heart. And the drunk, he says, this was surprised. And it woke him up, you might say, for just a moment. And he said, "Oh, say, what have you been drinking?" And Master said, "It has quite a kick in it, doesn't it?" And he left it at that, and he went. But Master didn't reject the man. He didn't push him away. He embraced him, and he looked into that man's eyes, and he saw the divine there in that person. And I think this, when we speak about learning to accept people as they are, And not just merely accept them, but you could say with our love to embrace them. I think people have a confusion about that. And one of the confusions is perhaps people don't do that. They don't accept people as they are because they're confused between the concept of accepting another person and agreeing with that other person. My person might think, well, if I show love, if I accept this other person, tacitly perhaps I'm showing agreement with that person's behavior. Obviously that person's behavior, I don't think it's right. So I don't want to agree with it, so I don't accept. But think about this. Did Master agree with that drunk? I don't think so. He didn't agree that becoming drunk is the right way to go. Did St. Francis agree in that story of the robbers? You know that story. St. Francis was away from the monastery, and at that time there was a group of robbers, 2 or 3, in the local neighborhood, and the villagers had become fed up with the banditry of these fellows and banded together and began to chase them, and what would happen if they caught them, I don't know, but the bandits were certainly fearful enough that they tried to escape, and seeing that escape was going to become impossible, they ran to St. Francis, his residence, his monastery. But St. Francis was away at that time, so they came into the monastery, and the head monk, who was in charge of the monastery at that time, seeing the robbers come in, and that robbers asking for sanctuary. Now in those days, if you would go into a church or into a monastery, you were given automatic sanctuary, and the villagers wouldn't come in, couldn't harm them at that place. And so what happens is the person who was in charge of the monastery sees the robbers come in, and he says, "What are you doing? You know, how can you bad men, how dare you come in here and expect us to have refuge here, take refuge here? Be gone with you." And he sends them away, and they run off into the forest. Well, St. Francis returned shortly after, and the monk mentioned this to St. Francis, and he was expecting St. Francis to approve of his behavior, but St. Francis was aghast that, "You what? You sent them away?" And he demanded that monk find those robbers, apologize to them, and bring them back to him. The monk did as he was bid, and he went, he found those robbers, and he asked their forgiveness and told them that St. Francis wanted to meet them, and they came back. And St. Francis embraced them, or lovingly he did embrace them, and he says, "Why do you live this way? Why do you behave this way?" And showed them kindness, gave them food, a place to stay. And the story is that those robbers stayed in the monastery and became monks and reformed. And this is the power of love, the power of accepting and embracing the people around us as souls, as children of God. When we disapprove of somebody, we don't agree, and I'm sure St. Francis did not agree with the robbers' choice of behavior and the way they made their living, but that wasn't the point. He saw them, something deeper underneath them, and he wanted to help them. Shouldn't that be our motive when we see somebody or when we think of somebody? Why isn't this person like me? Why isn't this person doing this or that, or these various things? If we're truly concerned that that person is misbehaving or doing something wrong, isn't our motive to change them? And if that's so, how do we change another person? Do we take a stick and beat them on the back? I mean, that has certain limited effect, I suppose, in beating another person, but how long-lasting is it? And is that person really changed by that? Or maybe you could say, is it as effective as some other means? And I think this was the secret of any great saint's ability to change other people. Certainly was the secret, what I saw in Swami Kriyananda's life, his secret to be able to touch other people and to affect change in those other people. He used the power to inspire. He used the power to uplift. And this is something that was very key to Swamiji's way of life, but it's more than just personal to him. It's a principle of the spiritual life. It's a principle of magnetism. If we want to achieve something, we can try to force it, or we can magnetically attract it. We magnetically inspire other people. We uplift other people. We make them want to raise themselves up to a higher standard. In Swamiji's book, of The Art of Leadership, he mentioned this is one of the primary responsibilities of a leader. It's to inspire other people. You lead not by coercion, you lead not by force, but you lead by inspiration. He says, because it's only when people are inspired to a higher state of consciousness, they're inspired to see their own potential, that they're able to transcend the natural tendency of people, of each of us, to think limitedly about our own welfare, about ourselves. We get out of the ego. And it's also, if we want to change other people, if we want to inspire other people, Swamiji had a very, I thought, a very effective suggestion. If you're trying to convince somebody, let's say in this case to reform, is to become better, to change their behavior, Swami would say, if you're trying to convince somebody, your first duty or job, so to speak, is to get that person to say yes. Get them to say yes to something. If you start off by presenting something to another person, and the first response that you invite is them to say no, you've immediately put up a block between you and that person, and it's very difficult then to get that person to change. But if you can first convince a person to say yes to something, even if it's a little something, do you agree with this? That we are underneath, we're all friends, perhaps. You say that, the person, how are they going to say no to that? They say, yes, I agree with that. And then you can build the next thing, the next thing, and the next thing. So this is a principle of first embracing people and accepting people where they are, and then if you feel to, and you feel it's your position to do that, and then helping that person to be able to rise up. This is, of course, what Swamiji or what Master did with that drunk. There was that other story of Master who, after one of his discourses, he had mentioned in some of his discourses some famous people in that day and age, during the Depression years of the 1930s. He had mentioned some names of people who were, their behavior was unhelpful. They were causing suffering to other people by their selfishness. And after one of his discourses, a gunman confronted Yogananda and said he had been sent to shoot him. And Yogananda, as you know, I think the way Swamiji tells his stories is the gunman approached Yogananda and says, "Why did you say that about those people?" And Yogananda replied to him, he says, "Well, God is not pleased when he sees some of God's children hurting and harming others of his children." And then Yogananda looked at that man deep in his eyes, and he sent him a wave of love and blessings. And the gunman at that point began to tremble. He was feeling that wave of inspiration and love coming from Master. He began to tremble, and he threw the gun down, dropped the gun. He says, "What are you doing to me?" And then he threw the gun down. He says, "I can't live like this any longer." And he ran away. He had been sent, "I've been sent to shoot you. I cannot live this way any longer." Master inspired him. He didn't, in order to inspire, he accepted him as a fellow soul. And this is our duty, you could say. But it's not so, I don't want to say it in terms of a duty, because it's our blessing to be able to do that. Because we find in the process of learning to accept other people as they are, not necessarily agreeing with them, but as they are, accept them as a friend, as a soul, as a fellow human, as a fellow devotee, we find that then, we find very magically in our life, we will attract to ourselves supportive friendships wherever we go. Because people can feel that. You don't, it's nothing you do, nothing that you have to say. And this was also the secret of Swamiji's success in life, is that wherever he went, he found that he had friends. And it's the same thing with Yogananda. When he was going to America, he had a little bit of trepidation that here he was going to a strange country. Think of it, in 1920, all alone by himself, knowing nobody. He went to another country, and he found that his master had told him, he says, wherever you go, you'll find friends. There was that story that I always liked of Swami Ramtirtha. Swami Ramtirtha, before Master's time, earlier, about a decade or two or so or two earlier, also came to America, and for a shorter period of time he went back to India. But he was inspired to come to India, and so he took a sailing ship, and it went across the Pacific. In this case, I believe it landed in San Francisco. And he was on the deck of the ship, interacting with one of the other passengers there, and telling him of his life, and that he was going to the United States to share God's message with other people. And this man who he's talking to, who was American, said, well, when you're going to San Francisco, who are you going to meet there? Do you have friends there? And the Ramatirtha said, no. He says, I don't know. He says, where will you be speaking? And Ramatirtha says, well, I'm not sure. And he went on in this way. He says, well, then the American was quite surprised that Ramatirtha had not made any concrete plans in a very organized sort of way, and taking this long trip across the ocean. And finally he asked him, he says, well, do you have any friends there? And Ramatirtha says, I have one. And the man says, well, who's that? And Ramatirtha says, you. And the man was so touched by Ramatirtha's willingness to give himself into God's hands, but yet also he could feel that truly Ramatirtha was his friend and saw him as his friend. And this man, then when Ramatirtha came to San Francisco, hosted him, and then made arrangements for him to begin and do this lecture tour in the United States, and helped him in that way. And you'll find, when you have that ability to accept other people as they are, as souls, they have their quirks, they have their outer personalities, which can be sometimes a bit frustrating, sometimes quite amusing, sometimes helpful, that if you can learn to just see them as souls and embrace them psychically, emotionally, with your heart, you'll find wherever you go, people will respond to you, and they'll become your friend. If you do, though, if you have trouble, now let's say it's natural. I mean, people are not natural. It's a habit. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It's a habit for people to mentally judge other people, to mentally disapprove, to not accept, perhaps. If that's a difficulty you're having, and if you find yourself in a situation where that person, why are they doing this, why are they doing that, and so on, and you find yourself putting up this block, maybe it's not the best to fight that tendency as much as it is to put your energy on the positive side. Think of that other person's positive qualities. Certainly there must be something positive about that other person. Focus on that if you have difficulty overcoming your tendency to focus on the negative. And this, of course, can be applied to many things in life. The negative seems to attract our attention more quickly than the positive. But if we can learn to moderate the dislikes in our life, you'll find that somehow you begin to like everything else. Many people think I have likes and dislikes, and in yoga we're taught to overcome the heart's tendency to have all these superficial likes and dislikes. And so I'm not going to like that, and I'm not going to like that, and I'm not going to like that. And then they'll say, well, ice cream, good food, fun, outward activities. That's usually not so successful. Better to focus on overcoming your dislikes, being able to accept those things in life to which you naturally react. The likes, the other side will take care of itself. But if you can and this is this being able to embrace and to accept other people particularly, will then lead you to learning to be able to accept what is in life. This is one of the qualities, you could say, of, in the yamas and the niyamas, we have overcoming the practice of non-lying. And the positive way to express that is truthfulness, to learn to be truthful. The essence of truthfulness is to learn to accept that which is, and to recognize that which is. What is truth. And as to the degree that we can accept truth, and then deal with it if necessary, but that being able to recognize what is, rather than putting up a barrier in our mind. I wish it was this way, I wish it was that way, oh no, it can't be that. You find that you're never going to be addressed. You could also say that learning to accept what is the essence of that niyama, which is santosha, contentment. If your mind is continually disapproving, your mind is continually judging, your mind is continually finding fault, you'll never be content. Accept what is, because it's God's world. This is not our world. God is in charge, and God's world is good. And if we can see underneath the surface, we'll begin to feel that presence of the divine in all things. I've often noticed, and this is something that Swami Kriyananda would mention from time to time, I've often noticed that the expression of dislike or the inability to accept other people, I think to some degree it's based upon perhaps or let me ask this way, why doesn't a person accept other people? Why doesn't a person accept things that are different from them? I think a person feels threatened oftentimes. There's a certain threat. And when a person is threatened, it's a reflection that there's a certain element of doubt in their mind. If you're truly convinced in your own heart of the rightness of what you're doing, other people's choices for something other than that are threatening to you because they cause a certain amount of doubt. But if you're completely sure in your own heart, based on your experience, other people's behavior has no bearing on your own inner state of contentment, your own inner state of happiness. You find that then you can accept everything, and other people's doubts or other people's behavior is not going to stimulate your own or shake you in your own foundation. Swami Kriyananda liked to express it in this way. He said, dogmatism increases to the degree that another person has doubts. He said it, he phrased it in a mathematical equation, you might say, as doubts go up, dogmatism increases as well. And people become very adamant that this has to be this way, it has to be that way. And usually when people are that forceful and wanting to impose perhaps that on other people's behavior and how they should be, it usually reflects a certain insecurity within themselves. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, no, it's not in the Yoga Sutras, this is in Swami Yukteswar's Holy Science. Swami Yukteswar mentions the necessity for each of us to make spiritual progress. You might say as a foundation before we can even take a step on the spiritual path, is awakening the heart's natural love. We have to awaken that magnanimity of heart, that embracive aspect of heart, to be able to make spiritual progress. Because how can we possibly, God, come to us, win God's love, if we can't win the love of other people as well? We have to have that heart quality that's winning, and then God responds to us. And he goes on to mention that there are a number of meannesses, he calls them meannesses of the heart, that block our ability to awaken that heart's natural love. And one of those is he mentions is things such as pride, but it's also prejudice towards other people. These ingrained habits of thinking that one person is better than another, or that one person is different from another. There's a story that demonstrates this that Master used to tell, and Swami wrote a song about this as well. And when Swami's, in Paramahansa Yogananda's lifetime, in the earlier half of the 20th century, in America, racial prejudice was quite strong. And fortunately, it's moderated. It's not nearly as bad as it was at that time, or even in the previous centuries. The world, this country, and the world as a whole has made progress in this way. But at that time, it was quite strong. And he told the story of a man by the name of Jim Brown, who was a very devout Christian. But he was African American, and in the southern part of the United States, where prejudice was quite strong in those days, he tried to enter into a Christian church whose congregation was all white, Caucasian, and he was rejected. He was told that he couldn't worship there, that was only for white people, and that him as black man couldn't worship there. Well, Jim was a very devout Christian, and that evening he went home, and he was very sad that this state of affairs should be, and his heart was very, very heavy, and he was praying to Jesus. He says, why are people like this? Why am I who love you, why was I rejected in this temple that is supposed to be open? And his heart was this way, and he began to weep a little bit at this dilemma, this situation that he'd found himself in. And at that moment, he had a vision. And in that vision, Jesus Christ appeared to Mr. Brown. And he looked and he says, and as Master told the story, he said, Christ looked at Jim Brown. He says, Jim, don't be sad. For 20 years, I too had been trying to enter that very same church with no more success than you. And this is how it is when we close our hearts to other people, when we're prejudiced to other people, when we reject others, we're rejecting God as well. We're closing our hearts to God, because God resides in all of us. And so to overcome that, to accept other people outwardly in that case, but also mentally and inwardly, to moderate that tendency to hold people at a distance, that's the beginning. But then we need to take it one step further. Acceptance means a positive embrace in the spirit of love, in the spirit of sharing, in the spirit of seeing all people as sparks of light from the Divine Mother. Then we see everywhere we look in everybody, we can see God reflected in all. And if we find if we can come to this understanding and practice this, even when we don't have that understanding, affirm it, we find that the truth that Swami mentions in this morning's reading, you'll begin to see that wherever you go, you'll begin to attract supportive friends. Many blessings to you, and it's a joy to be able to share with you today.